My name is Tanja. I've spent the last 15, 20 years as an investor across various stages in startups. So from early stage stuff to more late stage stuff. And so I'm very excited to talk about this very important topic about how can we fund all of this madness. And the first panel that we're talking about, we're going to be using the asset class more of venture capital, and we're going to be talking more about startups and what kind of funding opportunities there are. So the first person who's already looking at us, I'm so excited to finally see you, Katz. Please welcome from Paris, Katz Borlongan. Katz is the director of French Tech. And then we're supposed to have David. I'm not quite sure how that works. Is David Katz here?
I am here.
Ah, I can't see you, but it's
also
lovely to
online.
hear you.
And good morning. Good morning from Vancouver.
It's wonderful to welcome you. So David Katz is the founder and CEO of Plastics Bank. And we have a very fitting title. It's called How Can Money Save the World? And I'm telling you, this gentleman actually does exactly that. But before we jump into a discussion, I would love to start with you, Katz. It's been really hard for us to connect because I know you've been extremely busy. But there's something that I get, I think maybe twice a year for the last 5 years now, and I call that France envy. Because I'm extremely envious what you guys are doing in France in the startup scene and what French Tech is doing. And I had that feeling again 2 nights ago when I read the news. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what's happening in France, basically, what you've just done?
Sure. I mean, we announced the rebound plan, which was announced by Borlongan, the Prime Minister and the President, just about a week ago. And if anybody was wondering whether or not, the dream for French Tech and, specifically President Macron's dream for the French Tech is still alive, all they need to do is sort of look at all of the photos that were taken on Monday. We had the president opened the Élysée Palace for the very first time since confinement to welcome representatives from the French Tech ecosystem from across the country and addressed us directly. So there were about 150 people, mostly founders, but also a few investors and community organizers, and addressed us directly, not just about what government is doing for the startup ecosystem, which was detailed in the announced on the rebound plan, but also what he expects of the ecosystem, because this is sort of like a two-way street, right? Like startups aren't supposed to be just a lobby; they're also supposed to be this sort of incredible force of change in France as well.
Fantastic, amazing. Unfortunately, it's very difficult for us to understand what you're saying, but I hope we're going to manage this. It's not you. I think it's just the way the stage is set up. So, David, unfortunately, I can't see you, but I would love to hear a little bit about your journey, how you started Plastics Bank. You have a very strong passion for the SDGs, and we had a very passionate conversation about how you feel that most of the SDGs are not as relevant as SDG number 1, hence ending hunger, and this being the foundation for your mission.
Well, and I think the question is incredibly relevant in that the plastic bank itself is monetizing waste. We've created an opportunity for the world to use the garbage that's beneath their feet as money that pays for school tuition, medical insurance, groceries, clean water, and everything else. The material we collect, we sell back to great multinationals like Henkel and S.C. Johnson and others. However, at the root of it all, and the real solution to marine debris, is to end poverty. It should be no surprise that plastic that's entering the ocean is coming from areas of extreme poverty. And the SDGs in order are relevant, and that if we want to end and help solve the issues of equality and plastic in the ocean, we have to end poverty first. If we don't end poverty first, all of the other SDGs become very challenging. So it's really placed that way so we know what to focus on.
Understood. One of the one of the big contention always is I have so many startups that constantly come knocking on our door. I think my diary is filled next week from the GreenTech Alliance founders that are looking for money. And there used to be this whole saying about, oh, it's impossible, there's not enough funding out there. I'm going to talk to Norbert about that in a second, because we kind of disagree. We do believe for interesting entrepreneurs early stage, there is enough capital. But you had a wonderful way of explaining this to me on the phone the other day, Dave. Just go out and do it. How did you do it?
Yeah. Well, it's a difficult question. Now, for us, we began, and I think that you need to begin. You need to prove, and I think that there's a conversation around people waiting for things to be perfect before they begin. And I'm in the knowing that the perfect is the enemy of the good enough. And we need to be substantiating business models, trying business models. We need to be in the application of idea. And it's from the application of the idea that we get the feedback that helps us then to reiterate and implement. It's really a lean startup philosophy. Implement, take feedback, reiterate, and grow. We knew that we needed to be a sales organization, and we needed to go out and find customers. We also have conversations from startups as well, looking for money that have not focused on finding customers. And that really has to be it. It's really a business solution to the change that we need to see in the world. It should be no surprise.
Norbert, how do you see this?
I think I discussed it before. I don't think that capital markets are the element that slows any transition, especially over the past 5 years. I mean, just look at the news. The United Sustainable Development Goals are well understood by investors. Private equity, big tech has been the thing over the past years. From what we sense in our daily business, there's way more demand for these kind of investments than there is supply, and hence look at the valuations. So the capital markets is really not what slows down a transition towards a more sustainable world. It's other things.
I think one of the things that we will be talking about in a later panel, which I think is really interesting, is when we talk about more late stage and when we talk about corporates and when we're talking about spending trillions and trillions, that financing green isn't so hard. It's greening finance. That's the real problem. But Kat, do you have any thoughts on how entrepreneurs in the more environmental space or sustainability space are going to be doing? Because one of the hypotheses, pardon me, is most of the VCs that are currently funding, they still have a fiduciary commitment to their shareholders that they need to provide returns and generate profit. So I think a lot of the more sustainable funding that needs to happen will come in new funds that are about to be created, right? They're going to have a different governance structure. Whereas current VCs are probably not going to invest in sustainability startups that don't churn a massive profit. That's just my hypothesis. What are your thoughts on that, Kat?
I mean, things work quite differently depending on the ecosystem. And again, sorry, I'm like hearing myself. Let me just. So the challenge is essentially, making sure that your LPs and your VCs and your startups are aligned with the overall goals of sustainability. Now, as you said, this is usually super challenging when you're looking towards just pure profit. And this is also one of the reasons why the French state has invested so heavily. And I don't know, how aware you are of exactly how the French state invests, but if you look at the last few months alone, we put in 4 billion just for state bank guaranteed loans for our startups during the crisis. We were the first country to roll out an emergency crisis plan for startups, only 1 or 2 weeks after confinement. On top of that, there's already the 5 billion that President Macron announced actually last year that's going directly into growth stage funding. And just a couple of weeks ago, we announced another 3.7 billion that is going to be reinjected into the ecosystem. Now, when we do that, we don't necessarily always invest directly. The French government, when we work with startups, tends to adopt more of like a match fund type of approach, very similar to Germany. And I think one of the things that we're really, really spending a lot of spending a lot of time doing is not just sort of like just general investment, but sort of structural decisions on where the investment needs to go and what is the future. The point isn't to just sort of like flood the market with money, right? The point is to invest not even necessarily in a company, but in a very specific future, and try to make sure that the money is going into the right direction. So a lot of the rebound funding is actually going very heavily into deep tech startups, which, you said that it was easier. It's fairly easy for startups to access funding. I don't believe that's true for startups that are coming out of research. There's a massive gap all across Europe, actually, for very science-oriented startups that are capital-intensive, that have a very strong industrial component, that have AI, that have to work with massive factories and things like that. And for that, you need quite a lot of capital up front. And the government has made the decision to actually, be very present for those startups and make sure that they have what they need to change the world the way we want it to change.
Yeah. No, I do agree. Yes.
I think Kat mentioned the important word is the ecosystem. And just from the Swiss perspective on it, there's a very specific ecosystem, which is a close link between the universities that we have, basically two big ones, leading ones globally, very tech-oriented, and the startup scene, and also wealthy entrepreneurial families. And maybe that's the reason why, in fact, in Switzerland, there's not much state involvement. It's all private, it's all commercial. And I would disagree in a sense that there's lots of examples where it's about tech, heavy investments, and they can close these rounds rather quickly because of this ecosystem, how it's set up.
So one of the things, Kat, I fully agree with you. This is where a lot more needs to happen. One of the joys in my life is helping the European Commission on some of these investments, and I sit on the advisory, I help the investment side. And it's so true, because especially when we're talking about sustainability, we just spent, I think the last budget was 350 million on the Green Deal, and I study these proposals, and there are 100 pages of extraordinarily sort of very infrastructure-heavy technology that will never be funded. And the European Bank calls this non-bankable because no VC fund would ever touch it, and it's extraordinarily capital intensive. Oh, finally I get to see David. This is fantastic. So that we need a lot more of those, though. The European Commission, the Horizon 2020 is running out at the end of the year. Horizon Europe is coming. But we need a lot more commitment of capital for these types of companies. Do you have a viewpoint in Toronto? You guys in Canada are quite innovative with grants for deep tech startups.
I don't think I can comment on that, but the one thing that's striking me here as well is that there has to be a new paradigm in capitalism as well. I believe that is beginning to emerge. Would always want to emphasize that it's traditional capitalism that has returned us here as well. It has returned to shareholders at the expense of all others that has met us with the degradation of the environment. So I'm encouraged by those B Corp operations, the other ones that are now creating a return for the world as opposed to a few select. That's something that has to be brought to life as well. Traditional venture capitalists and others as well are just looking for a return. A new paradigm has to emerge, and certainly grants are available. And the application process requires time. There's a tremendous entrepreneurial journey for any startup as well. There's a learning curve that needs help too.
Did we just lose David? Or he's frozen? The trickiness of digital conferences, huh? I'm sorry, Dave, we can't hear you at the moment. We only have 2 minutes left. Are there some thoughts or some pieces of advice that you want to leave our audience with? I think we have a lot of founders watching us online.
Well, I would leave that for the other panelists. I have a lot to say all the time. But,
oh, well.
Certainly. Thank you. You know, I think if I was to, my only comment in relation to the last statement as well is to look for return for the whole, where is abundance being created? And of course, the more abundance that we create in the world, the more that we get to share with as well. A paradigm that includes all stakeholders, not just shareholders.
Yeah. Kat?
Yeah, I think for us the shift is a little different. I think pre-COVID, you know, as someone who's in government, a lot of the things that we were hearing were, well, what can government do for startups? What is the latest fund? And we were always rolling out different funds and different programs. And I think now the expectation that we have for the ecosystem post-COVID is a little less on, you know, what can we do for our startup ecosystem, which is the way, you know, a lot of these panels or a lot of the discussions on startups are oriented. And I think the real question is, well, you know, now that Europe really needs a startup ecosystem to step up for it, and in a very, very aggressive and very urgent and immediate way, how do we make sure that the funding makes that journey possible? And I think, you know, these topics are just too important to leave to 100%, you know, market logic. And if there are certain other things that require investment that gears more towards impact than profit, then, you know, whether it's us, the European Commission, or the German government, we certainly have a massive role to play.
Right. Thank you so much. Norbert?
Maybe I disagree a bit. I think we can have confidence that the market solves it, has the solutions. And I think if you're really, in the end, we're discussing about the transition here, transition of the economy. What is the economy? It's how much we spend. It's what we spend, what we buy. And I think there's a clear link to what we heard before. If we as a consumer do the switch, I think it was the panel on mobility where this came up. That's exactly what changes the economy, because the economy delivers what we buy. So basically, think of it as a cash flow, a recurrent cash flow. We want to move this. We want to move this to something else, that the footprint of this cash flow is less. It really starts just with you as a consumer very much. Second comes maybe the government, the ecosystem, that there's no transmission losses, that there's no frictions. And part of that then is only, in the end, a third derivative, you can call it like that, is the financial market, which, for me, from my perspective, hardly ever delivers any frictions. If we look beyond the consumer, if we want to solve something, to be honest, in Europe, it has to start with politics. Get away, get these frictions out. And don't think of costs. A transition does not have any cost, because it's cash flows. Instead of a combustion car, you buy an EV, you still buy a car. It's just a rerouting of cash flows. There's no cost related to it. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm going to get in trouble, but I think we're out of time. I wish 20 minutes wouldn't go so fast. David, I love what you do. Really warm hugs to Toronto. Keep on passioning, fighting, doing so great.
Thank you.
And Kat, all the best. I look forward to seeing you in person again one of these days. Take care, you guys, and thank you very much. We'll see you soon.